Good evening, I'm Jim Zirin, and this is The Digital Age. Tonight's show comes to you from London, where our esteemed colleague Richard Susskind interviews Lord Saville. Lord Saville is a former justice of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. He was the author of an extensive report known as the Bloody Sunday Report, in which he treated an incident which occurred Sunday, June 30, 1972, in which 13 unarmed civilians were shot dead by elements of the British Army. The report took 12 years to complete and was exhaustive in nature. It could not have been done without the aid of digital technology, and the report imposed culpability on the British Army. Tony Blair called the report fair and exhaustive, and it led Prime Minister David Cameron to apologize in behalf of the government almost 40 years after the event. So we go to London. It's Richard Susskind. Over to you.
Thank you, Jim, and good evening. This is a special edition of Digital Age being broadcast from England. I'm Richard Susskind, and I'm sitting in the Judicial Institute at University College in London. And my guest this evening is Lord Saville, until recently a Justice of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. He's perhaps better known, however, as the chairman of the Bloody Sunday Inquiry. This was an inquiry into the events of 30th of January 1972, when in Northern Ireland, under British Army fire, 13 people were killed. Lord Saville was asked to investigate the events of that day and produced his report. 13 years later, it cost £200 million, and it extended to 10 volumes to 10,000 pages. There was some concern during the conduct of the inquiry about the time taken and the cost as well, but when it eventually was published, it was widely regarded as definitive. Lord Saville, a very warm welcome to you. Information technology in your public inquiry, it played a key role, but I wonder if we could just go back a little and you can discuss the background to the inquiry itself, the troubles in Ireland, and the context of the inquiry itself.
Well, the troubles in Ireland would fill many, many volumes, and even when it did so, there would still be disagreement about the origin and course of those troubles. But the troubles with which we were concerned of the inquiry really started in 1969, an offspring of the then civil rights movement that was spreading all over the world. And in 1969, the paramilitary organisations, the provisional IRA and the official IRA, decided to renew a campaign of violence because they took the view that it was only by using violent means that they could free Northern Ireland from the shackles of what they regarded was an outdated British Empire and allow Northern Ireland to become part of the Republic of Ireland. The majority of people in Northern Ireland, however, wanted to stay part of the United Kingdom. So you had what was called this sectarian divide. And from 1969, for decades afterwards, that resulted in the Troubles, by which is generally meant the use of violent, lethal force by the two factions against each other, with the police and army also using lethal weapons in an attempt to calm the situation.
So what happened on the 30th of January in 1972 on that day?
There was a civil rights march on the 30th of January. This was to protest against internment without trial, which had been introduced by the then Northern Ireland government the previous August. And it was a big march. It was also, on the face of it, illegal because marches and processions of that kind had been banned by the Northern Ireland government. We calculated at the end of the day, but over 10,000 people took part in that march through the streets of Londonderry, as some call it, Derry, as others call it, which is a small city, but it was a very large march. The army prepared to stop the march from getting to certain parts of the city because they feared that violent elements among the crowd might well cause damage, if not death and injuries, if it was allowed to go into certain areas of the city. And the army did successfully stop the march from reaching those areas. But at that stage, the 1st Battalion of the Parachute Regiment, which had been brought specially to the city for that occasion, were ordered by their colonel to go in and make arrests among the crowd. And it was after that, during the space of only about 10 minutes, that 13 people were shot dead and a similar number were wounded by army gunfire. And
your inquiry was launched in 1998, so almost 26 years afterwards. There had been an earlier inquiry by the then Lord Chief Justice. That hadn't satisfied?
That is true. The then Lord Chief Justice in 1972 was Lord Widgery. He was asked to conduct an inquiry a few days after the event. He was also asked to do it as speedily as possible. And in fact, he produced his inquiry in 11 weeks. He produced a report. But there was a large segment of the population in Northern Ireland and elsewhere who regarded his report as a whitewash of the soldiers' actions. And the families of those who died and the wounded themselves campaigned for the following decades for a new inquiry, and the government in 1998, as in effect part of the peace process, decided to institute a new inquiry and asked me to chair it.
So you've been appointed and you have this fantastically large task before you, huge amounts of evidence, very large amounts of witnesses. Can you give us a sense of the scale of the task you faced? If they had such a class, it probably got me into the Guinness Book of Records, because so far as I know, this is the largest public inquiry on any subject that there has ever been. At the end of the day, if you calculate the figures, we had 435 days of hearings in open court. We called 900 witnesses to give oral evidence. We read the written evidence of another 1,500 witnesses. We had huge numbers of documents. The central documents amounted to 250 bundles, each many hundreds of pages long. We had the transcript of the evidence given before the previous inquiry. We had thousands of photographs and some 20 to 30 hours of film recording, both that taken on the day and that taken on subsequent occasions when people were interviewed about the events of that day. So there was a very large amount of material to look at. And how quickly did you recognise that technology would have to play a central role in conducting the inquiry?
Well, we recognised that before we started, because it did seem to me that information technology would be of inestimable help in conducting any inquiry of a large size. The other very important factor is that this was a public inquiry. Now, if you have a public inquiry which involves large numbers of witnesses and large numbers of documents, photographs, films, and all the rest of it, okay, you can go into the hearing room and you can sit down at the back and you can listen to what is going on. But you won't have those documents, you won't have those films, those photographs, because it's simply too expensive to copy them for the use of anyone concerned. So that in those days, without information technology, a public inquiry was really public in name only. If you went and sat and listened in an inquiry of any size, you really would have little or no idea what was going on. Information technology transformed that. We digitized all the material and we displayed it as the witnesses were giving evidence or as counsel were making submissions, so that it could be seen by the public at large. Not just in the hearing hall, but we had closed-circuit TV so people elsewhere could also see it.
So the digitization, that was of documents, of photographs,
of everything.
Of everything.
Of everything.
So all of that was available electronically and for your use in the hearing room itself?
It was for our use in the hearing room. It was for the use of the public. Every evening on our website, we put up the material that had been presented during the day and also recorded it so people could look at what had happened during the day or what had happened in previous days. And that meant that worldwide, and there was a worldwide interest, people could see exactly what was going on, look at the documents we were looking at, look at the photographs that we were looking at. And I think it worked. And one statistic I do have, which measures perhaps a degree of the public interest throughout the world, was that the day the report was published, which was the 15th of June last year, we got 6 million hits on our website during the course of that day.
That's remarkable. And these users are able not simply to read the report, but actually look at photographs, listen to recordings, view video as well.
Yes, we used information technology so as to hyperlink all the references we made to the evidence, photographs, transcripts, statements, whatever, so that as you read the report, you will see a footnote where we quote from some witness. And if you click the footnote in the electronic version, that will take you to the entirety of that witness's evidence so that you can read the context in which the quotation which we set out in the report is set. And you can also do research yourself on all the documents that are available on the website by that sort of means.
There's also a DVD version of the report as well.
That, to my mind, is the easier version to read. It's very difficult to carry around 10 volumes, which is what the printed report comes to. You can put a single DVD in your pocket. That will not only have the report, it will have all the references to which I've referred as well.
So in the hearing room itself, moving to that, what did it look like? It looked like a NASA control room.
Somebody so described it. There were monitors on the desks of the 3 members of the tribunal, monitors in front of the counsel representing the interested parties. The media, who had their own media room that we set up for them, had a CCTV link so that they could see what was going on. There are these very large screens. I think they were either 60 or 72-inch screens so that the public could easily see the documents or photographs or whatever it was being presented and the witness being questioned about them. So it did look fairly high-tech, but it worked.
But also, I suppose, when you were using LiveNote, which you should say something about, that also increased your ability to work through the hearing rather quickly.
Yes, I don't have any shares or financial interest in LiveNote,
and nor
but
do I.
We found it invaluable because LiveNote, of course, will display on a screen in real time what the witness is saying. There's usually a lag of about a second before that text comes up.
Yes, there's a stenographer sitting there and their keystrokes are automatically, almost instantaneously converted into text on screen.
If you look right at the end of the report, we have a chapter about the way we conducted the inquiry, and I do pay tribute to those stenographers who sat through 435 days, taking down with extraordinary accuracy every word that was said.
So you digitise all the materials, major task, you use document display technology, the hearing room is full of screens that help participants, I think, move far more quickly through the proceedings. You've got LiveNote too, but there was something far more ambitious as well, wasn't there? You used virtual reality, which for many people is quasi-science fictional, and very few people, I think, would suspect that an English judge would be installing a virtual reality set up within the conduct of a public inquiry. Could you say a little bit about that? Because I think that really is fascinating.
Yes, we thought of this quite early on before we started the public hearings because Londonderry, or Derry, depending how you like to put it, had changed greatly since 1972. In particular, in 1972, there were 3 very large blocks of flats called the Rossville Flats, where a great deal of the action on that day took place. And they'd been demolished decades ago. So to assist witnesses, we worked up a virtual reality of the city as it was in 1972, using digitized photographs and the like, and put this on touch screen. So witnesses could touch the screen to point to where they were. The screen could be orientated 180 degrees, so you could swing round. You could, in effect, walk down the streets concerned, and you could make notes, put arrows on the screen, and that sort of thing, all of which, of course, being digitized, all of which would be turned into part of the dossier on the witness concerned. And a lot of witnesses found it extremely useful to use that machine in the course of giving their evidence to explain what they were saying, where they were, what they saw, and so on.
Technology then really at the heart of the inquiry. Any particular examples of dramatic or interesting or memorable uses of technology?
Well, there is an example which in fact is of old-fashioned technology, because we discovered quite soon after we started investigating the matter that there had been in the city on that day a lady from New York City who was a civil rights worker and who had come across to observe the civil rights march taking place on that day. And immediately after the events in which people were killed or injured, she went round the town and did so for the next day or so with a tape recorder and asked people what they had seen, what happened, where they were, and so on. We managed to track this lady, Miss Kevill, down eventually, and she still had those tapes. But we transcribed them, and we also made copies of them. And a large number of witnesses who we called were taken down to what we called our witness suite, given a cup of coffee to settle them down, and then we'd ask them to put on the headphones and listen. And many of them had completely forgotten that they'd spoken to Miss Kevill on that day. And so they sat there transfixed because they were hearing their voices from decades ago.
Voices from the past.
Indeed, very much voices from the past.
Because over such a long period of time, people's memories must fade and their recollections must be in some ways unreliable. I mean, I suppose your example illustrates that people perhaps didn't even remember.
That is true, and that was something we had very carefully in mind. Not through malice, but just because of the frailties of the human brain, it is very easy, we all do it, to come to believe that you've seen something or heard something which you haven't. And we had that very carefully in mind when we took written evidence, took statements from the witnesses. But to do that in turn, you have to have experts taking the evidence. And we employed a firm of lawyers, a very large firm of lawyers, after a beauty contest, who did what I can only describe as a marvellous job in taking expert statements. Having taken those, you're quite right, you have to bear in mind that with the passage of years, memories become blurred. There were very few people indeed who set out to deceive us. Most people honestly and genuinely believed what they were saying. But in a number of cases, from contemporary photographs and the rest, we could demonstrate that although they were in good faith, they were simply mistaken. So it was the contemporary stuff on which we placed a huge amount of reliance.
An interesting mix then of conventional forensic legal skills on the one hand and technology on the other. But the technology didn't come cheap, did it? It was a fair IT budget.
The technology was a substantial part of our budget. But I think you've got to weigh that.
Do you have a particular figure?
I don't actually, but it's certainly many, many tens of millions of pounds. But you've got to weigh that against the sort of time that I believe would have been spent if you hadn't used these tools. Now, time in a public inquiry, time in any judicial proceeding is money. It was the lawyers, of course, who cost most of all. The lawyers cost over half the amount that we spent on the inquiry. And their remuneration was to a large degree time-based. So that if you take longer by doing it the old-fashioned way, you spend much more money. It's difficult to form any exact calculation, but I certainly am firmly of the view that by spending that money on IT, we reduced what I agree is a very long time for the inquiry, by a very large margin. I suspect that it would have taken years longer if we tried to do it the old-fashioned way.
Imaginable without technology, or unimaginable in your own experience?
Looking back now, I don't see how we could have done it without the technology that we used.
We've talked about the conduct of the hearing, but actually in the production of the document itself, you wrote a report which is the equivalent of 40 textbooks in length. How did you have your desk set up for that? 1, 2, 3 screens?
I had 3 screens, one of which I was drafting on, one of which would call up the particular piece of evidence I was looking at, and one of which would be to look at the submissions of the various interested parties. So far as those submissions are concerned, to save time, we require them all to be reduced to writing, digitized, and themselves hyperlinked. So if I was looking at a particular submission, say on behalf of some soldiers, I would have it on my screen. They would refer to certain documents or other evidence. By clicking on their hyperlink, I could save time by going to the material on which they were seeking to place reliance.
Did you write it linearly from beginning to end, or did you write it in chunks? Was there a writing method? Or?
I started at the beginning in the sense that a substantial part of the report, for those who care to look at it, is concerned with the events that led up to Bloody Sunday. And we worked up basically from the formation of Northern Ireland in the 1920s, because it was that division that was done for no doubt good political reasons at the time, but which led to the difficulties and finally to the troubles which, in the course of which Bloody Sunday occurred. So I started by doing that to give myself the full background before we got to the day itself. As we got closer, within a year or two of the event, we started looking at matters in very, very much greater detail. We discussed at considerable length, for example, the introduction of internment the previous August, because that's what gave rise to the Civil Rights March. And as we got closer to the day, we got more and more detailed. So if you read the report, you'll see in the weeks and days and indeed hours before it happened, the report becomes more and more detailed, until we get to the day itself, when we were really dealing with matters on a minute-to-minute basis.
A monumental achievement. Time is against us. We could genuinely discuss this for hours, but I wanted to see if we could draw a more general lesson from this. You had effectively unlimited budget for technology for the conduct of the inquiry. You've been heavily involved with IT in the courts over the years, and it's true not just in England but across the world that by and large our courts, both criminal and civil, are underfunded when it comes to technology. What is your feeling looking back in the inquiry where you genuinely had the opportunity to use the systems that were available to their maximum? What's your feeling about how they could be more widely applied across the justice system?
I thought Bloody Sunday did offer a demonstration of what you could do with information technology by making proceedings more open, by enabling people across the world who were interested to see what was going on, and indeed to speed up the process of what was this huge inquiry by digitizing material which assisted both during the course of the inquiry and while we were preparing our report. Governments, of course, are always short of money, particularly short of money at the moment. But I'm bound to say I think it's short-sighted, because I think the investment of money in information technology in the judicial process does pay very large dividends at the end of the day. And I hope that sooner or later, if you take the civil justice system in this country, the money will be found properly to utilise information technology. It'll do nothing but good for the justice system.
Lord Saville, that's been fantastically insightful, an inquiry that not only addressed a crucial social and political issue, but also one that demonstrates so clearly how technology can be used more widely across the justice system. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for joining us. This has been The Digital Age, broadcast from the Judicial Institute at University College London. I'm Richard Susskind, back now to Jim Zirin in our New York studio.
London, that was fascinating. Thank you so much for your report and for joining us on this special edition of Digital Age. Thank you, Lord Saville, for your distinguished service and your contribution to the public record. And thank you, Richard Susskind, for your contribution in books and over the media on the digital age. For the Digital Age, I'm Jim Zirin. Don't forget to tune in next week. To learn more, visit our website at www.digitalage.org. For the Digital Age, I'm Jim Zirin. Good night and all the best.